Even men at the top of their game find themselves wanting more from life. Whether it's more meaning, unshakable confidence, a bigger impact, more money, deeper love, a hotter sex life, or a powerful legacy. Find out how good your life can be on this episode of Man Alive. Also, as I've supported men in their love and work lives for 15 years now, many men ask for the right words to say to be more successful, attractive, and desirable. But I found it's not so simple as giving scripts or lines because every man is different. So giving words or scripts would be like giving a tall, thin man a shorter, wider man's pants, or vice versa. The words have to make sense for you and your personality, and there's so much happening beneath the surface that people are responding to. If you're interested in how to become a better lover and leader in your own unique way, go to shanajamescoaching.com/quiz, or you can text ALIVE to 44144. It only takes a couple minutes and you'll start to get an idea of how you can be both more respected and desired. After you fill it out, we can schedule a time to review your quiz and talk about your specific challenges and desires. So again, go to either shanajamescoaching.com/quiz or text ALIVE to 44144. That's ALIVE to 44144. Enjoy this episode of Man Alive. Hello and welcome to this episode. I'm so happy to be here today to talk about why most people struggle in love. And most people, I think, don't even really know the root of why we struggle in love. You know, we can say, oh, I'm frustrated with this, or I'm mad at this person. But ultimately, it tends to be so much deeper. You know, I always looked at my parents fighting over the garbage and I realized, you guys, it's not about the garbage. You know, it's about feeling understood or feeling appreciated, all these things. So we have an amazing guest today, Riana Milne. Riana, welcome. Thanks for joining us. You've been a therapist for decades, yeah?
21 years
21
as a
years.
Therapist, and
Amazing.
More years teaching the mindset for success since my 20s.
Wow.
I was teaching that. Yeah.
Powerful. And I know you've had some really, personal experiences as well in relationships that surprised you and haven't worked out. And I was reading one of your, I think it was in your ebook or on your webpage, around how people can start out. It can seem like we all put our best foot forward in the beginning, right? The first 1 to 9 months, I think you were saying, is when people actually
It's actually the first 4 months where everything seems to be going well. Then 4 to 9 months, or when the relationship starts getting serious. So if you're moving in or you're engaged, get married, have a child, this is when some of the emotional triggering happens.
Right. And so this is something to look out for in those 4 to 9 months. And then for the men who are listening who are married, it's going to be a little bit of kind of rewinding and looking to see, oh, what are the things, what are the things that are causing us stress and tension, and how can we work with those?
Right. And when we have married or exclusive couples, we're looking at partner A, partner B, and the relationship. So there's really 3 entities that I have to treat around the trauma piece. What trauma does person A come from, person B, and then what traumas keep showing up to stress out the relationship.
Stress out, right. Okay. So as we're diving into trauma, some people don't really have a sense of, do I have trauma? What is trauma? So let's describe, because one of your foundations, right, is that there's a lot more trauma in relationships than people realize. And that's what's creating these unhealthy dynamics.
That's correct. The research showed, and I did over 2 years of research putting my materials together, my book, Love Beyond Your Dreams, which is 400 pages. I got up to 400. It's like, I got to stop. And then I started putting more into the workbook that my clients use, which is 150 pages of interactive exercises. So there's so much to teach, but what I was finding, first of all, 9 out of 10 people have at least 1 to 3 of the top childhood traumas that I put on my list that I developed in 2012. Wow. Why did I develop it then? It was because I was coming out of a toxic marriage. I stood up to be the attorney for that annulment because I discovered, too much of my shock and the shock of the school superintendent, that our principal had a whole secret life. So, I said, no one else could tell my story like me. And I decided to act as my own attorney and got the annulment. And after that, none of my psychotherapist friends could help me heal. Because I don't know if you remember, Shana, when I went to school, we didn't hear about childhood trauma at all.
No, I don't remember that being a part of my psychology education, which is fascinating.
Not at all. And he said to me, my ex says, I don't know why I sabotage everything I love. I don't know what's the matter with me. And I said, I don't either, but I'm going to
find out. Yes.
And that's what led me to because I needed those answers for myself to heal.
Yeah.
And then as I was gathering more and more information, I'm like, oh my God, people have to know this.
Yeah.
So it's very interesting. My top 10 checklist, which I call the childhood trauma checklist, is very different than the ACE checklist when that came out. And I'm like, wow, they're missing abandonment. They're missing kids from foster care, because these are people that I worked with in my private practice, right?
So give us some examples, because, for those people listening, like sometimes we think of trauma as, right, you're adopted or you're in foster care, but I know there are other things that can happen, small things that can happen even in a loving family that can be traumatic.
Right. Well, first of all, most people don't think that they've had any trauma. They can think about one or two things that were kind of upsetting, right? Yeah. That's the norm. And I was one of those people. I was like, well, I could see his trauma, but I didn't have any until I did the research. It's like, well, wait a minute. Yes, I did. I have bullying. Right. And bullying wasn't on the ACE test, not originally. Right. And I'm like, how could I not have bullying on there? That was so traumatic for me. Yeah. And I come home crying every day. I was very tall and skinny and kind of gawky. And then I got into modeling, and that kind of helped and saved my self-esteem and my confidence.
But underlying that, right? And I imagine that doesn't come out until a very intimate relationship. And then suddenly that childhood trauma comes back.
Or you grow up and you mature and you look different than you did when you were 12, but still,
but it's still there under the surface.
At that time, that was very hard. So anyway, I could go through the top 10. So that makes sense to everyone, because people recognize one or the other. And as I do, I just want to remind our listeners that this is not about blaming mom or dad, right? Yes. When you grow up, they did the best they knew how. And the studies show childhood trauma goes through at least 3 generations. So if you had childhood trauma, so did your parents, and so did their parents.
Right.
As a matter of fact, it can also change your DNA. They were finding people that experienced the Holocaust had certain gene DNA dynamics that were passed to their children and their children.
Oh, yeah. I can feel that. I mean, my great grandparents, right? My lineage is in the Holocaust, and there are still ways that I can see my parents' reactions and feel my own reactions.
Exactly. Yes. Yes. So it's more powerful than people realize. Okay. So that's the first thing. So it's not about blame or feeling ashamed if this happened, you were a child. So we're just trying to look at this as facts. Did this happen or did it not happen?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
So the first one is any kind of addiction within your parents or your caretakers. Yep. So like Kaiser's study, the ACE study said, well, if there was drugs
and
alcohol.
What is ACE again? What is ACE?
Adverse childhood events.
Okay. Great.
So a lot of people have heard about the ACE test, which I didn't really see until 2016. And I was shocked that they didn't have like what I had on my list, right? Because then later they went back and they updated.
And they expanded. So, so you've got addiction, parents' addiction.
So addiction being an LCADC, licensed certified drug and alcohol addiction, is more than just drugs and alcohol, right? Uh-huh. So I was treating kids who had to hold the secret that they knew their dad was cheating on their mom all the time.
Wow, right.
And we driven to the lady's house and had to sit in the car for 4 hours while he was enduring his thing. Wow. That's traumatic. So we call that around sex addiction, porn, gambling, hoarding, spending, eating, gaming addiction, TV watching, workaholism, or even social media now.
Wow. So any of those addictions that a parent had, right, as a child in that family, there's an impact.
There was an impact.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Second one is verbal messages. So you could have watched verbal fighting between your mom and dad. They could have been yelling and screaming at you, or even as much. And I was having this conversation on the beach yesterday. 3 of us, all baby boomers, our parents never said the words, I love you.
Interesting.
And one man said, one of the top reasons my wife divorced me is because she says, well, you don't even tell me you love me. He goes,
wow.
Well, I don't use those words. I said, that's exactly what my mother said to me. And I was like, Mom, why don't you tell your kids that you love them?
Yeah.
She goes, well, we grew up in the Great Depression. It was all about survival. So again, just trying to understand where did they come from. But it's, kids want to hear that from their parents. They need to hear that.
Right. And partners need to hear it, right? As that man was saying, if you don't say it, just that sense of, well, they know I love them because I chose to marry them, or all the things that then happen as a result of these
it's ongoing words of affirmation and love. So if you didn't hear that as a child, or you didn't hear like, great job, kiddo, I'm proud of you. Instead, you were always criticized or nothing was good enough. That's good. Okay, got a B plus, but why aren't you getting A's? Like everything was never good enough, right? Yeah. So those verbal messages are very powerful. 3 is emotional abuse or neglect. 4 is abandonment. And again, the Kaiser first study had no abandonment. I'm like, what?
Can you explain abandonment too? Because I know there are big versions of abandonment and small versions of abandonment.
I go into defining 2 types of abandonment, just working with all the populations. I'll explain the populations. I worked in the school districts as a student assistance counselor. So I worked with the emotionally upset kids, the kids identified as oppositional defiant, ADHD kids, the bullies, the ones being teased and bullied. Yeah. Those were my kids. Okay. So from kindergarten all the way through Rowan's Counseling Center, I worked with every grade level. Wow. So I heard a lot of stories. And then I was working in a hospital center for adolescents at age 5 all the way up to 19. Then I worked in a drug and rehab center for teenagers and one from women from the prison system. So all these stories combined is what created my list, right? Yeah. Okay. So the abandonment I identify, there's fault and no fault abandonment. So a no-fault abandonment would be if you lost your parent as a young age. Right. It's not their fault, but the abandonment is huge, right? The sorrow, the grief around loss of a parent. If your parent's off to war. During the Iran and Afghanistan war, I was in an elementary school. And these kids would just be like checked out emotionally. And it's like, what's the matter, honey? Miss Riana, I don't know if my daddy's going to come home, from war. I see on TV every night more and more soldiers dead. Like that's all they can think about. Of course. Then they're labeled ADHD. I said, that's not an ADHD child. No. This child's going through emotional trauma. Yeah. Right. So it's very interesting to see the differences. So that's a no-fault abandonment. They're away. Or the father or mother that has to travel due to work. And I'm like, whoa, I recognize that one in me. I remember asking, when's daddy coming home? And my mom didn't know where he was. So it's like, well, is he okay? As a kid, and we were close. So I always wanted him to come home. My mom was the tough one. So when dad came home, it was happy time, right? Oh, interesting. But we found out years later he was FBI and CIA. So he can't tell the family where he is. Oh,
interesting.
Yeah, and we got letters from the president, and William Casey was head of the FBI at the time. So when he retired from that, then we knew we could put the pieces together. But okay, so that was one. So a fault abandonment would be if you're never in the child's life, if you're in the child's life while the couple's together or married, you break up, you barely see that child, or you lie and you say, yeah, I'll come around this week, and you never make it, or you're always late, or even being in the home but emotionally checked out. Yes. If you don't go to your kids' events at school, you're sitting there, let's say it's a father watching football all weekend and the kid's visiting the weekend, and the kid's just in the room on his computer because dad's watching football, and to him, he hates football because that's all his dad does. Right.
I think that's a big one too, that people wouldn't necessarily realize, that the absence of parenting is one that can get missed in our own, as we look back at our own history. For some people it's obvious. And for others, it's like, oh yeah, I was alone a lot, or my parent didn't come to my events.
Yes. Okay. The next one is being part of the foster care system. I got the foster care kids at the Atlantic Care Hospital, so I knew their trauma. Yep. If they were adopted or they had to go live in other people's homes because their parents couldn't keep them. So even if there was too many kids to feed, or they lost their home and then they had to shuffle them off to grandma or the aunts and uncles, that feeling of, I can't be with my mom or dad, very difficult. So that's number 6. Number 7, most can identify with as one of their top 3, and that's personal trauma. That's if you were ever bullied. If you felt different as a child, you might have been chubby and overweight, or the skinny, gawky child, or called the nerd. You might have had asthma as a kid and couldn't be on the sport teams. You might have been the only African-American teenage girl in an all-white Caucasian school, or even trying to come out as LGBTQ, and people teased and bullied you because you were different, right? So many people can identify with those messages. Trauma number 8 is sibling trauma. That's if your sibling bullied you, if they were born with a medical problem. So mom and dad had to give more
so much attention over there.
Them. Or most often you perceive them as the golden child, the one more favored. They might have been more handsome, more beautiful, more athletic, smarter than you, and you're always compared to your older sister, right?
I love that you're bringing the sibling piece in because, again, I think most of us focus on our relationship with our parents, but the sibling relationship is powerful as how we evolve and who we be in the world.
Yes, it's very interesting. And how different you end up becoming from your siblings, right?
Yeah.
And I always say your friends become your family as you get older, right? These are the people you more identify with. And then the last one, trauma 9, which everyone's experiencing now. So this is one of your 3, no matter if you think so or not, is community trauma. And COVID pandemic is a community trauma around the world. So everyone's experiencing that right now. Also, our community traumas is our weather events, look like what happened in Texas, or our floods, fires, hurricanes, mudslides. These are wiping out communities at large, and then they impact the family, right? So 9 has these 2 parts, community and family. So family, with COVID, people are losing jobs, which means they're losing their home and they don't have enough to pay their bills. So all that stress first from community trauma now impacts the family. Our military families here in the U.S. are moving every 2 to 4 years, putting their kids in different schools each time. Kids who have incarcerated parents, or if they grow up in a dangerous neighborhood where there's a lot of lack messages, we don't have money for this, or we don't have money for that. And those lack messages stay with people a long time. And then 10 is mental health illness in mom or dad. The 2 most difficult I describe simply for our listeners is bipolar and borderline. So borderline personality is like fast trigger anger and extreme moodiness. When they're good, they're great, but when they're bad, they're horrid, and you never know what's coming. Yes. It's always like coming home walking on eggshells. Are they going to be in a good mood today or not? So for that little child's mind, that brings them up with a lot of anxiety. Well, my clients come to me with ongoing anxiety.
Yeah, if we kind of grow that child up and look at that child in an adult relationship, there's kind of fear, anxiety, a trying to get it right, trying to please, and then losing oneself, right? So these are amazing. I'm just, really impressed with the list. Can you walk us through? So then say you're in an adult relationship. How does this start to show up, right? What are the ways that
there's many combinations, at least like 24, but some of the most common things that I see. And if you're in a coupled relationship, think of you and your partner. If you're single, think of you and somebody you might have dated, because you really want to get to the bottom of this if you're single out there dating before you become too involved and committed. Okay. So lying and manipulation, that tends to be from the sociopath. When you have a lot of traumas, and I also assess the severity level of 1 to 10. So let's say you have 9 traumas with a severity of 9s to 10s. That would be like a little boy coming home and being hit every day from the alcoholic father, screamed at, hit. That's severe. Okay, so if you have a lot of severe traumas, they would then tend to, the highest one on the list is the psychopath. The psychopath is a sociopath, a narcissist who has the criminal mind and can kill without remorse or empathy. Those are the serial killers, right?
And then can we go to the other end of the spectrum again? Because I think a lot of people listening have those unidentified, or I wouldn't think of it as trauma. Like what are the small traumas that actually...
Yeah, I'll go into that. So that's the high severity list. Okay. So anyone that's jealous or controlling, that tends to be from trauma number 7, not feeling good enough, and maybe the verbal messages. Those 2 often go hand in hand. Like, change that outfit. You look fat in that. So even if that child was chubby, she might grow up to be a beautiful woman in good shape, but she always thinks her boyfriend's looking at someone else, right? Because her self-image was, I'm not pretty enough, right?
Yes. What I love about what you're saying is like jealousy seems like just this thing. People get jealous, but it can get really out of hand. It can become overblown. And then people, if they don't have either a psychological or spiritual path where they're understanding themselves and their traumas and their wounds, they're very identified with that. Like, I need to know this, or you can't do that thing because I don't feel safe. And so right, this is where
The whole feeling of safety is big for those who had trauma. Impulsivity, that's often someone that grew up in lack. They see the sports car and it's like, I want that, I deserve it. I wasn't allowed to have anything nice when I was a kid.
Yeah.
So the impulsivity track is one of the most damaging to an individual and a couple, because that's usually the one acting out. That could be the sex addiction, the gambling addiction, acting out. I want to do this. I deserve to have a couple of hours of fun, but then they lose 20 grand, right? So they don't think of the consequences. They just need that Band-Aid of, I deserve this.
Yeah. Right? And I'm thinking about some of the men I work with, and I'm curious, for a lot of the men who are in heterosexual relationships with women, they talk about how women kind of pull away or shut down, or they get more angry or, explosive, or kind of more cold or distant. Do you have a sense of where that can come from?
Well, it depends. I mean, perfectionism can be the male that had a very difficult, critical mother. And then in his mind creates this fantasy perfect wife, right? He expects her to be perfect, not complain, not get sick, not say no to sex. She's supposed to be everything he, envisions the perfect woman to be. So that could be someone that had that mother-son conflict. Perfectionism, that's difficult. Blaming behavior, always blaming or criticizing your partner because you might have grown up and it could have been normalized. It's funny, I'm from Philadelphia, right? So I had a lot of South Philly Italian friends that kind of yell at each other all the time, but that's how they talked. And here in Florida, I had a South Philly woman come in with a Midwestern husband. And his main complaint was, she screams at me all the time. And she looks at him, she goes, what do you mean I scream at you? I never scream at you.
He's like, you're screaming at me right now.
I said, you don't hear it, do you? See, this is what we call normalized. It's so normal to her to speak like that. And for him, it's not. So it's like that confronting feeling. So we have to look at area norms, cultural norms. What to one person seems perfectly normal could be very offensive to your partner, right?
I love that you're bringing in too, like it's two people, right? So one person grew up in a household where nobody fought. The other person grew up where fighting was totally normal. They come together, not realize, they love each other, but they didn't realize how different their paths are. Or even, for a man to see, sometimes my wife is criticizing me or complaining. And sometimes it can come from, I have this perfect ideal of her. And other times it can come from the way that it's never one person, right? It's always two parts of the story. I think that's what I'm really appreciating too.
And I have straight and LGBT couples as well, right? So when I have partner A and partner B, the third piece is the relationship. So I have to treat each childhood trauma and see how it's showing up in the relationship and teach them to communicate differently. Now having understanding and empathy for the childhood experience that they each had. You see, so let's say the husband comes home from work and he got criticized by his boss, who was a male, and the father he grew up with was always criticizing, you're no good, you'll never amount to anything, right? Heard those verbal messages. This struck an emotional trigger because trauma stays stored in the brain and the body cells. So he comes home agitated, upset, anxious, exhausted, comes in, says one thing to his partner, who hears that, oh my God, he's picking on me again. Why is he always picking on me? So instead, that person would say, hun, I just had a really bad day. I just need like a half hour to myself to just unwind. It's nothing about you. My boss criticized me today. And it kind of struck a chord with me. So yes, they know, because they know about the critical father. And they know he's not like just coming home to escape the house. He just needs some time to settle his nerves and go into meditative state and use some of the tools that we teach. So it's a whole new way to communicate with your partner so nobody feels affronted or offended, and that they're claiming their own stuff, right? They're claiming what is going on for them, because you can't change what you don't understand. And I was at that part of, I don't get it. I don't know what he has. I don't know what I have. I don't get it, because we had this ideal loving relationship. So how is this a Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde personality type, which is to the public so fabulous and wonderful, right? Charming and outgoing, and then had this whole secret life that destroyed himself. He was the impulsivity model. So that destroys him and the relationship and the children. everything, right?
Yeah.
So that's why I said that's usually the most dangerous. A lot of women fall into people pleasing.
Yes.
So let's say that's that little girl with the alcoholic mom who's hungover and screams at them all day. So she'll get up, let's say the older daughter, get the siblings ready for school and the bus and get them, out and do all the lunches so that mom's not screaming at any of them.
Right. And then she grows up.
Well, she might hear a
I was thinking that one of my clients, we were talking about how she was, ended up yelling at her husband for this very small thing. But when we walked it backwards, it was all the way to, right, I've got to do everything. I can't be supported. Then I look like I'm not good enough. And that whole dynamic. And I work with a lot of men who identify as nice guys too. And so there's a lot of that people pleasing that happens in that way as well.
Yeah. So it's really quite interesting. So this would be the female that says, no one loves me like I love them. She's always burnt out, exhausted, but she will do everything to try to please, but it never seems good enough. Just like with the mother, she'll hear any little criticism as a real affront.
Right.
So it's all these, then abandonment, that's huge. When there's abandonment, that's where codependent relationships come in. It could be
like you can't leave because I was left before and it was so traumatic. So like I will keep you here no matter whatever I have to do.
Yeah. The research shows that they break up and get back together 7 times.
Oh, interesting.
In these relationships.
What do you make of that? Like,
let's say the guy has a toxic female partner, right? And he knows consciously, she's no good for me. She keeps cheating on me, but I love her. And at least maybe we can get back what it was in the beginning. They keep trying to get the beginning back.
Got it.
What came from that is they had such a lack of love. And again, maybe from that mother, right? Yeah. That they crave, even though it was toxic, and they know it's toxic. A little bit of love is better than nothing.
Yes, yes.
Right?
Yes.
So they'll settle for the crumbs until they heal this childhood wound that's going on inside them and raise their self-esteem and their confidence and know that they deserve better.
Yes.
And then they start, dating again with a whole new mindset, knowing that they are the full package, knowing the questions to ask to see if that person in front of them has toxic, unhealed behavior. Or, they could say, this happened when I was growing up. Let's say my mom was alcoholic when I was growing up, but she quit when I was 14 and took extra efforts to come to my football games and really, be there and support me. And she was so apologetic for those alcoholic years. Now that's trauma that's healed, right?
Yes, or healing.
So you look for those messages. But if you hear, and I hate her, I barely talked to her today. I never call her. So that's still a broken, toxic relationship.
Right. And what would you suggest someone do? If they're dating and they hear that language from a potential partner, how do you suggest people address that rather than just let it slide?
Well, you don't get too intimately involved with someone. The purpose of dating is to ask questions to see if they're a match. So if they're not, you can say, I think you're a very nice person, but I don't think we're quite a match.
So you would say, like, if someone says that I hate my mom, or if there's a lot of that anger there, you would say that's not a good person to pick as a partner.
Exactly.
They need to do their work first.
They have work to do. Yeah, that's really what we call conscious dating. Yeah. You're very consciously aware when you're dating. We have 24 questions that my people ask. And by the first or second date, they usually know if this is a good partner to be with or not and why.
Interesting. Yeah. And what strikes me as you say that is, I've been doing spiritual work and psychological work for 20 years, my partner for 30 years. And so we are, I think, really great partners. That doesn't mean we don't fall into some of these patterns ourselves at times, right? We know we have a willingness to work through them and be vulnerable. But I'm also thinking about someone who could still be a good partner, but it takes some work or it takes some willingness for both people to show up and work through these patterns and traumas.
Yeah, very often I have couples where one partner will call me after hearing this and doing the childhood trauma checklist and the ebook. And they're like, I want to do this. And they're like, absolutely not. I'm not going.
The other partner.
So I would say, So I would say to partner A, you start. Because one of two things are happen. A, your self-esteem is going to go up, your confidence, your knowledge. You're going to heal your own trauma. Yes. You're going to start feeling great about your life. And your partner will now say, wow, I might lose them. They're really feeling good. They're looking good. They're smiling, So they get scared that they are going to leave the relationship and they ask to come in. Or B, this one really knows this one is not changing, refuses to change and said, I'll be happier without them. And then they move forward. Yeah. And then they're ready psychologically to move forward and know what type of relationship to look for.
Yes. Wow. Yeah. This is so
important. If they come as a couple, they usually do excellent with this program because now both are invested, right?
Right.
So we're both therapists as well. When a couple comes in the room, very often one partner's already out the door.
Yes.
They're just coming to tell
if they're both there and they're both willing, that's a great sign. Yeah.
But if they're both saying, we want this to work, we want our marriage to stay together, then now I know they're both psychologically invested. Yeah. Okay, guys, let's teach you what to do. Yeah. And it's so much easier that way.
So great. So great. You're doing really, really important work.
Thank you. Yeah, I love it.
Anything else? I mean, I know we've in some ways barely scratched the surface, but as we're imagining, wrapping up and leaving people, what feels most important that we haven't covered yet?
I want to make sure that this is absolutely healable. Childhood wounds and love trauma. Just because you might have had one sociopath or narcissist in your life, they're also high on the trauma list, right? Doesn't mean you have to keep attracting that over and over again. Yeah. Unfortunately, usually when people don't heal their trauma, they keep tending to attract the same kind of partner over and over again. They don't know why. Yeah. So this is the part where you're saying, okay, there's something unconsciously going on with me in my chemistry and attraction field that I'm bringing in people that aren't good for me. That's, get help, because once you learn these skills, you will use them for the rest of your life. That's the most important thing to know. What price can you put on your mental health and happiness? It's worth everything, right? So get the help. You'll use these strategies forever. And, once you learn what is the emotionally healthy relationship, what that is, you would never settle for anything different.
Isn't that amazing? That's one of the things I really, really blows my mind is that, right, once you really get what that healthy relationship looks like, or once you get in your bones that you deserve to be respected and you don't have to be an asshole about it, but you would just never stand for someone berating you or cutting you down or any of that. It's like, it's just such a different world. And I really appreciate what you're saying around it is healable. Even if you've been choosing the same partners for decades, now that you're starting to hear this information, right, you can start to choose. I have the men I work with really look at what has not worked in the past and what is my role in it? How did I contribute to this? Because they can start to see, oh, this is where I take my power back.
Yes, because it's not about feeling ashamed of it or embarrassed. It's like, oh my God, I finally see what I've been doing wrong.
Yes.
I can help this and I can be a better partner now. I can heal this and feel better inside myself. Yes. And with a lot of men, the whole societal push that they have to be the hero. They have to be perfect. They better not screw up, right? That's a lot of pressure to begin with. So now let's add these messages that might have been dysfunctional from mom and dad. Never hearing, I'm proud of you, son, or good job, kiddo, I knew you could do it. Never hearing those messages. So that it tends to really cut on the self-esteem. Sometimes I have men that are chronic cheaters, right? So where does that come from? Yeah. Let's say the wife messes up. Okay, let's say the husband had a broken mother-son relationship. The mother is very critical. Yeah. So if the wife
messes up, just does something that he doesn't like, you mean?
Right. That's right. That he doesn't like, then he's there. Well, if she doesn't do it right, she'll do it right. Or if she doesn't want to have sex with me,
then someone else will.
Yeah. So they'll go looking for that female ego building reinforcement that he didn't get from mom, or he might not be getting from the wife. Yep. So what is cheating about? It's about, that needing that female adoration because he didn't hear those messages or feel that love from the mother relationship usually.
So interesting because, it's so normal to want that love and adoration from our partners. And then without falling into the trauma, there's a way of maturely negotiating or navigating or collaborating with your partner about that. Like, oh, I want to hear you appreciate me, or I want to feel more loved, versus I'm going to go off on my own separately with this trauma to try to get that need met.
Yeah. Yeah. Right. Being able to voice it, be able to calmly talk about your needs without fighting, screaming, threatening, any of those moods pushed out upon your partner. So
that is gold, right? To calmly talk about your needs without overreacting, exploding, or, distancing.
Well, this is what we call conscious love as well. Like really, there's something I do with my people I call stop, right? 5 things. Okay, so will this with these words, actions, or deed hurt me, the man, in any way? Will it hurt the partner that I love? Mm-hmm. Will it hurt my children in any way? Mm-hmm. Will it hurt my reputation on the job or in the community? Yeah. If in doubt, go without doing it, saying it, writing it, texting it. Okay, so it's like makes my people just stop and think, and that's a full conscious decision now versus acting on impulse. Right. So for my impulse types, I've got to really slow them down and say, is this good for you and everyone else, or is it only good for you? Yep. Okay. And what repercussions could come back because you're just doing what's for you and not for the good of all. And, my healing course has a lot of spiritual teachings in it, right? Is it for the good of all? Is a spiritual teaching, thinking more than about yourself. Right. So the narcissist is all about themselves. I want it. I deserve it. I need it. Yes. Versus I would desire that, but that wouldn't probably be good for my wife. So I'm going to say.
And then on the other end of the spectrum, I see the men, right, who identify as nice guys who are giving, and they don't even know what would give them pleasure or what would have them feel connected or cared for or intimate, right? So the both ends of the spectrum.
That's right.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for this. Yeah. What were you going to say?
Just one other point on that. The man that does not speak up, right? Instead, he may go into passive aggressive behavior where he gets really quiet because that could have been the little boy trying to speak his needs and then got whacked across the face. So the father's there. You don't speak to your mother or me like that. You don't say anything. You go to your room for a week, So he learned to speak up is not safe. So if his wife's angry, he's going to shut down and not say anything. And then he'll get angry later, which we call the passive shutting down and getting aggressive over something else. Yes. Because it eventually just explodes this need to want to be understood and heard, right? Yes. So definitely, you can learn so much from trauma wound healing or love trauma. And one usually leads right into the other. Right. Yes. So,
right. If you use a relationship in this way, it is such a profound mirror for you to see where you aren't healed and where you can actually grow and be more free and, be more fulfilled, happy, all of that. Thank you so much for being here today. And thank you for doing this work in the world. Where can people find more of you?
The best place is my website. It's my name, rianamilne.com. And on there is a free ebook that you can download. There's 4 free love tests. One of them is childhood trauma checklist, and one is a red flag checklist. You can check about your partner, see if there's any red flags going on. And the first 60 pages of each of my books, the #1 bestseller, Love Beyond Your Dreams, Break Free of Toxic Relationships to Have the Love You Deserve, and Live Beyond Your Dreams, From Fear and Doubt to Personal Power, Purpose, and Success. That's all about the mindset for success. And then I do have 106 podcasts and 250 tapes on my YouTube channel.
Wow.
Podcast is Lessons in Life and Love.
Incredible.
So I go into all these topics and more.
Great. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
I'm so glad you joined us for today's episode of Man Alive. I hope you enjoyed our conversation and it gave you something to consider and explore in your life. If you like what you heard, I'd be so grateful for you to subscribe and write a quick review that helps men like you find us. And again, head over to shanajamescoaching.com/quiz or text the word ALIVE, ALIVE, to 44144 to get a sense of how you can become a better lover and leader. You'll start to see how you can be both more respected and desired in your unique and genuine way. If you don't feel as confident or as excited about life or love as you'd like to be, this quiz is a really great starting point and will guide you toward a more passionate love life and a more inspiring and successful career. So again, text ALIVE, ALIVE, to 44144 or head over to shanajamescoaching.com/quiz. Join us each week for a new episode of Man Alive.